talking to Uncle Gary. He said to ask you about some things that happened.
Probably one about the rope. Didn't I tell you that one about?
Yeah. What was that? He said that.
Ask Grandpa Taylor how strong a chilling the rope is.
What was the deal with that?
Didn't we record that before?
No.
You know, Gary, he liked to bait Dad and, you know, get him to start on things because he said the things for so many times. And so Gary and I would be riding behind Dad, you know, a few horse lengths behind him. Gary would say, you want to find out how strong a chivinda rope is? And
what's a chivinda rope?
That's a Mexican pita, you know, those hard twists.
Oh, okay.
Made out of the maguey. That's what we used to use.
Oh, really?
Yeah. You know, and some of them were better than others.
Just depending
some
on
how they were braided and that. And some of them were strong. And they were real getting a cloudy day, and they just get stiff as a board. And since they got older and the sun would come out, they just get wow, those you could hardly even rope with them.
Huh.
But anyway, so Gary, he just would get up beside Dad on his horse and put his hand out and grab that rope. And he says, is this pretty good rope, Uncle Lauren? Is this rope strong? And Dad said, let me tell you, Gary, I roped a big old bull and I roped him around the belly. And he says, I thought he was going to break my rope. And he says, that rope just stretched way out there. He said, it must have stretched 2 feet. He says, it didn't break. So that's what Gary would do.
He said to ask you about the star car story.
Dad, years ago, that was for my time, because when I was young until I was a junior in high school, we didn't even own a car, not even a pickup. Everywhere we went, the ranch had to be horseback.
When you were a junior, everywhere you went was on a horse?
Well, yeah, or you bummed a ride to somebody.
Huh.
Uncle Harv had a truck for the ranch and a pickup that was supposed to be the ranch's, but he used it for his own personal use. But Dad used to talk, when we would talk about power, he'd say, well, I had a star car. He says it could go up the Dugway on high. The Dugway coming out of 20 horse. You don't remember the old road, do you?
I mean, I've seen remnants of it.
Yeah. And it could go up on, it could go up Strawberry, going to Pacheco on second. That's what it said, on second. He says it didn't have much speed, but it had a lot of power. So he's always talking about the star car. That's what Gary was referring to.
So now, was he did they have home teaching? No, you said that you had home teaching then, but you were never his companion, right?
Well, they call it ward teaching.
Ward teaching.
No, I went with Grandpa Wagner. But I don't know who went with Dad, but I know that when Carl Call was of age, she's about 5 years younger, I guess, than I am. I remember one time we were having a roundup, and it was on a Wednesday, and we let out kind of early, stopped early, and Dad says he was going to town, and I asked him why, and he says, well, because he had to do his ward teaching. The call boy was waiting for him. They just had a standing appointment the first Wednesday of every month.
Oh, really?
That they would go ward teaching. And if I remember correctly, Dad went about 18 years without missing a family.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
He was real good about, doing his church work. One time I had a basketball team, and we had just come back from Salt Lake on the all-church tournament. And Uncle Sal had been our coach, and Chato and Lindy, and a bunch of us, and Uncle Gary and I, and we were on that team. And we'd just been home about a day or two when Leland Robinson said that we had to go down and play the Dorados in Chihuahua. That there was a compromiso that he'd already says we'd go down there and pay. Now that was before the highway was built, so people didn't really like to drive down there. You didn't get to the highway until you got to Gallegos. That's further south in Sueco. That's where you come out. So it was over an hour just to get to Galeana.
Wow.
Sorry old roads. And so I remember Uncle Sal was talking, there weren't any phones there, and he was talking on a two-way radio to the guy down there that was in charge of, I can't remember his name, in charge of the game. And he says, well, where are you guys? And he says, we're in Dublin. It was still, or Casas Grandes, it was still noon. He says, well, you guys can't get down here in time for the game if you drive. He says, you'll have to fly. That's when they used to have an airline through there called Lamsa, bunch of old DC-3s. And he says, you guys fly down and then we'll pay you when you get down here. And Uncle Sal, he'd heard that story before. He always left holding the bag. And so, make a long story short, why they sent a plane up for us to fly down there. They sent a charter up because they'd already sold the gymnasium out, and there was going to be a big game and everything. And
just the one game?
No, it would be Friday and Saturday.
Oh.
And this was Friday noon. And so, like I say, we had just got back Tuesday, I think, from Salt Lake. And so Gary and I were on the plane, and he says, I bet you don't know who's sitting back there. I said, I have no idea. I says, who? And he says, El Jefe, referring to Dad. And I guess Dad had gone out the ranch and come in and got wind that there was a ball game. You know, he loved it.
On the plane.
Boy, he got cleaned up, changed his clothes, and he was on the plane too.
Oh, you didn't even see him get on?
No, we didn't know he was on.
How big were those planes? How many?
About 21 people.
And you hadn't even noticed, huh?
We hadn't taken off, but we hadn't even noticed that we were sitting up towards the front. And they had single seats on one side and double on the other. Gary and I were sitting together. And but I can remember on Friday night why the game, we were ahead of them. We were beating them, and that was, semi-pro team, the Dorados. They had some good players, but then we did too. We had Chato and Lindy and Oscar.
Oh, they were playing with you?
And Gary and I and Fletcher Mehmet and Leland Robinson. Faye Robinson was a good player. But anyway, the game got so bad that Lindy only had 4 fouls, and they said he had 5, and they pulled him out. And Chato had about 12 fouls on him, and they wouldn't call him.
How come?
Because he was so popular down there. Chato was. And Dad, he really liked those games, and he'd yell. Had a big old loud yell, and so when we got ahead of them, they had kind of a funny clock. It didn't have really a second hand on it. It just showed the minutes, And then when the last minute was on, I think the clock would turn red, and that's all you could tell. But anyway, they shut the clock off. We were just playing, and finally there was a timeout, and we went over to the side, and I was wondering what was happening. Uncle Sal says, sit down. He says, we're not going to play. He says, they're just trying to, steal the game from us. And that time, Soto Minas, who was the governor of Chihuahua, he got up and he says he declared that game null and void because of the officiating. He could see what was happening. And he says, tomorrow night there'll be another game here and we'll have different referees. So they brought a referee from Juarez, the guy they called Popeye. He was one-eyed guy, but he was a good referee. And another one from Mexico City.
Oh, really?
They flew him up for the game the next night. We won, but barely, But I can remember that Saturday afternoon we were staying at the Hilton there, just across from the downtown.
Was it an actual Hilton?
Yeah, they called it the Hilton. It was a nice hotel. It was, the terraces owned it. It was an old building there, and right there in front of the plaza there, the main part of Chihuahua. And they had the airline ticket agency there too, and I saw Chato and Uncle Sal and Dad coming out of the office. And I asked them, what were they doing? They says, well, they were turning in the tickets. They cashed them in. They just gave us regular tickets to go back to Dublin on Monday, because the planes didn't fly on Sunday. I said, what are you doing with your ticket? They said, well, we cashed them in because we're taking a taxi after the game tonight.
Taking a taxi all the way home?
Back to Dublin, yeah. And I asked him why, and Dad says, well, I got to give the high priest lesson tomorrow. And Uncle Sal, I think at that time he was ward clerk. And Chato had something. But anyway, they took a taxi and drove all the way home. They didn't get there till about daybreak. And I understand Chato had more Charlie horses, from sitting in that old taxi after playing a game.
Wow.
But that's the way he was, he would never be away on Sundays if he could help it. I can't ever remember all the years growing up that Dad ever spent a day on Sunday at the ranch. No matter what happened, everything stopped. In fact, when they were rounding up, it took about 10 days to round up. And so Saturday, after he'd just tell the men they could go home and do what they wanted. If they wanted to stay there, there'd be a cook for them. But he was going to go to town to church. I don't know if I ever told you about the time I stayed out there on a Sunday. I didn't stay very long, I can tell you that.
What happened?
Well, it was at the ranch house that Dad had way over there in the sands.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I must have been about 16, 17. And Dad went in on Wednesday to do his ward teaching. He had a truck then. Pickup.
So you were like a senior in high school or something?
I was more like a junior, I think.
Okay.
And he said that he had wanted me to do some things there with the man out there, Voltacho. And this is now on Saturday. By noon, if a truck hasn't come through, the truck's coming from Progreso or somewhere, San Puedes, La Boquilla, to hitch a ride into the station, and then walk home. And, I don't know, I got to playing around doing something, and I saw a truck go by, and I didn't bother to go down where it was. You could see the dust coming. When noon come, I didn't saddle a horse up to go to town because that's what I was supposed to do, because I knew if I rode a horse in Saturday, I surely had to ride him back on Monday, because we didn't have any horses, or anyway, we didn't put them in the back of the pickups or anything like that. And so I was shooting rabbits, and I remember just having a good time. And Sunday morning, just crack of dawn, I heard a darndest racket, and I could hear a truck honking and an engine being raced, and revved up, and from where we were, I couldn't see, and so I put on my Levi's and boots and went out to see what the commotion was, and it was Dad. He was on the other side of the fence. He hadn't bothered to open the gate. Get on the gate, and he rolled down the window, and he hollered at me. He says, "Hurry up and get dressed. You're going to be late for priesthood meeting." So Dad got me up, came out and got me, and when I got in there, he wanted to know why I hadn't gone, and I said, well, why didn't you ride a horse in, like I told you? Of course, he used his favorite saying, what, are you going to grow up to be, a heathen? I was kind of, I was a little perturbed at the time.
I bet you were.
That being, to waking me up that way, just as the sun had him come up and come and get me and haul me to the priesthood meeting. But now that I'm, that I have children of my own and stuff, I can see, the love that he had.
Uh-huh.
Of course, what he was teaching me is you do what's right. You don't break the Sabbath.
Mm-hmm.
You just don't. And there was nothing out there, that important. And I think some people would probably just say, oh, well, he didn't show up. And, we'll see him Monday. But not with Dad. There was just no. If you were in the wrong, you were in the wrong. No matter what happened. They were having a lot of problems with the kids riding the bus, breaking it and putting nails under the tires.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah.
Clear back then, too, huh?
Oh, yeah. I remember one time they went up to the Petrolera. That used to be a service station from today, and it's just a little bit south of the old depot there in Casas Grandes, and kind of kitty corner from the cuartel there. And that's only about the only place in town at that time you could ever get any gas. There was nothing in Dublin. So they called it the Petrolera.
Hmm.
And they were up there fixing the tire, and they had a guy by the name of Che Garcia was driving the bus then. Usually they had one of the kids the year before Wilbur Wagner drove it. And he graduated, so I was a sophomore. And they no more drove off, and while they fixed that one tire, somebody got a block of wood with a nail in it and put it under the other. He didn't get 100 yards down the road, they had another flat tire. And so it got so bad, Bishop Wagner was bishop at that time, and so they kicked all the boys off the bus. They couldn't ride the bus. And Dad, it was real important that you go to school. And he says, were you in on that? Fortunately, at this time I wasn't. And I says, no. And so he says, well, I'll back you up. And I remember walking with him all the way down to Albert Wagner. He lived in where Glenn Call lives now. He lived in the Call house there. And
Albert Wagner lived down there?
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
When he moved from Guadalupe, they used to live up in Guadalupe.
Mm.
And then before they moved to where Sister Wagner lives now, the old Cardinal place. That's where Bob Cardinal was raised.
Mm.
There now they remodeled it, took the top floor off, I think, and stuff. But anyway, and he says he wanted me to ride the bus, but none of the boys could. They just kept the boys out, period. But, he'd back you up. But, boy, if you were wrong. At that time, I remember Grandma Taylor, Aunt Levita, she says to Ladine and I and Sylvia, on the bus, she says, if you kids are in on it, I don't care what they do to you. What punishment says, they could come and get the Cordaddy after you. That's what she called the Cordada, was the Cordaddy. The Cordaddy. Down after you.
So did you get on the bus then?
No, not for a while. And then, I don't know what all happened. But I know my junior and senior year, I lived up with Grandpa and Grandma Hatch.
Oh, really?
I didn't even ride the bus.
Mm.
But I lived with them. We're kind of getting away from Dad now. Getting
that's
on
okay.
My story.
I kind of like all this stuff too. But let's see if I had any. Uncle Gary said to ask you about the little jig that Grandpa used to dance.
Oh, he could kind of do a little shuffle. He kind of like Buddy Epson on the Hillbillies. Jed Clampett. He could do a little kind of soft shoe type of dancing that way. I never could do it. But,
why did he do that? I mean,
he'd come in the house once in a while and feeling pretty good, and a little linoleum there and kind of smooth, and he'd just kind of shuffle a little bit and dance. And
in his boots, he always wore boots?
No.
No.
Dad only wore boots when he was riding.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm. He liked to wear these JCPenney, kind of a high top shoe that you laced up. They're real comfortable.
Yeah.
Because he always says his boots hurt his bunion.
Oh.
That bunion that we've all inherited from him. I'm getting the same way now. A long time I wear a boot is when I'm riding and I have some so sloppy I can hardly keep them on. But he was real good with his people, the people that worked for him. I mentioned Abram, and Abram was kind of, he worked a few years for Dad,
Now his dad worked for Grandpa, didn't he?
No, his brothers did.
His brothers.
I'll tell you who knew Dad real well is Quinardo.
Quinardo?
Mm-hmm. He worked for Dad out there when Dad, I think, first got that new ranch.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
And then he left, and then he came back and worked when my dad was running it?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I'm pretty sure Quinardo did. But, he always ate with the people. He never had any special dishes or anything. What they had was bean and tortillas. We had one gal out there, Ramon Martinez's wife, old Natalia. She was really a sorry cook, and she was just as about as mean as she was sorry to cook, too. And he worked there, and then later he worked for Uncle Harv after Dad and Uncle Harv separated. He got involved in rustling cattle and ended up in the penitentiary.
Oh, really? Was he
But
stealing from Grandpa Taylor?
he stole some of Uncle Harv's cows.
Really?
And his uncle was Rafael Macias.
Was that the guy you told me I should talk to?
No, Manuel was his nephew.
Manuel's the guy I should talk to.
Yeah, Manuel Macias. It was his nephew. But Dad had a sweet tooth, and I think some of us inherited that. After he had a meal, he had to have something sweet. And out there, they just didn't have desserts or anything. So Dad would get sugar and sprinkle it on a tortilla, and that was his.
That was it.
That was his dessert. And I just don't understand why, he didn't take a bottle of preserves out there and have some honey, and once in a while he'd have molasses. But this was kind of towards the end.
Uh-huh.
And I remember that we had a guy by the name of Socorro working out there, and he wasn't much of a hand, but they had him there. And Dad come to the table one day, and Dad got real mad because we had these tin plates, and they were real deep,
Uh-huh.
And old Socorro had that just clear full of molasses, clear to the brim. And he was slurping it up with...
Molasses?
Yeah, just eating it plain, with a big old spoon. Dad says, Benjamin said, damn, Matt, he says, I was hoping he'd get diabetes.
That would be horrible.
Dad jumped on him, but the guy, you couldn't insult him. But when people would be coming through the ranch there, and it was dark, and he'd tell them to put up their horse, and if they had a wagon, they'd put their team up and turn them loose, so they could have something to eat. Dad would invite him in to eat, And they all knew him, they all loved him, and when he died, why, we had kind of an open casket of viewing there, right there in the, your dad's living or dining room now.
Was that a practice then to have a viewing in the home?
Yeah, because you didn't have mortuaries. Of course, Dad, down home, normally when someone died, like my mother, they buried her the same day that she died. She died in the morning, they buried her in the afternoon. They sent some people out and dug the grave with a pick and shovel, and some carpenters there in town made the coffin, and then the Relief Society, they always had white material, and they covered the coffin inside and out, and they had some candles they put on.
Do you remember when your mother?
Yeah, I remember when she was in a coma, dying that morning. Yeah.
She was what?
Dying. She died up in a Hotel California.
Were you there?
Yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Dad was sitting there on a chair, tears in his eyes. He really loved my mother, and he really felt bad. She was just a young woman.
She was in her 30s.
Yeah, 34, something like that.
So they were only married 9 years before she died?
Let's see. I was 7, 11. We probably married 12, 13 years. Because Aunt Flowers is the oldest.
So she just died. I mean, she
they did an
operation.
She had an operation, and they're at the Hotel Central. You know who that is? It's across from what used to be the Noroeste, that Gandara store.
Oh yeah.
And at that time, Dr. Campo, he was an army doctor, the guy that lived. And apparently she needed a hysterectomy or something like that, and he operated on her, and then they didn't have any facility there, so they just carried her down to put her in a bed at the Hotel California, and it used to be not much. They had a restaurant there, and then you went out to the patio, and they had rooms off there. And that's where she was convalescing. And just about the day before she was to come home, she kind of developed a fever. Uncle Sel had been out.
How many days after the operation?
Probably about 5 or 6.
Oh, that many.
They'd keep him. Yeah, they'd keep you down when you had an operation. If you had a baby, you were down for 10 days. They didn't let you up.
Wow.
But Uncle Sel had come in. He had his chaps on, and he saw her and saw that she didn't feel good. And he kind of awakened her, I guess. She'd been sleeping. And he started out and says, "No, come in, sit down. I want to talk to you." You know, he had his chaps on and stuff. But I can remember Sunday morning waking up and hearing Aunt Nell crying. And Uncle Gerald and I slept in a little bedroom that they had there together, and we shared the bed. And I got up and I asked Aunt Nell, I said, "What are you crying?" And she says, "Aunt Lillian's dying," being my mother.
She hadn't died yet, though.
No, this was on a Sunday morning. And I guess Saturday she just got worse, and so I don't know who took us up because we didn't have a car, but I remember going up to the station and going into the California Hotel, and I'll never forget the scene. There was my dad sitting in the straight back chair in this small room. There were other people there. Grandma Hatch was there, Grandpa Hatch was there, and other of the family members, you know. And Dad was sitting in the chair, and the tears were just streaming down his face. And I looked at my mother, and she was in a coma, and all I could remember is just seeing the whites of her eyes, you know, because her eyes were turned back that way. And Grandpa Hatch took me by the hand and took me outside and sat me in the back of the car there. I think it was Uncle Seville's. And he put his arms around me and told me that I had to be brave, that my mother was going to die. And he told me what was going to happen. And this was early in the morning. It was like in June. It was in the summer. And she died, and then
She died that day?
She died right just shortly after that.
How long has she been in a coma?
I don't know. But I can remember Flora Jean and I and Gerald walking to Sunday school, and Aunt Flyers was crying. And Sister Romney.
That very day?
Mm-hmm. And Sister Romney, we were across the street on the sidewalk, and Sister Romney came out, and she saw it, and she asked Aunt Flyers, "What's the matter?" And she says, "My mother died." And I remember going to Sunday school and telling all the kids, you know. See, I was small. You know, I didn't really realize. Gerald doesn't remember any of this, but...
So you were 5?
7.
7?
Mm-hmm. They had her laid out there. The Relief Society were putting coal packs on her, and then they put the coffin on top of the table there, and then the dining room and people around, and then they, after everybody come by and paid their respects, then they took her over to church and had the funeral.
It's that Sunday, huh?
Took her out and buried her. I always thought it was the next day, but Aunt Flyers always said it was the same day. After reading some stuff and some letters that Grandpa Hatch wrote to Aunt Hannah. Aunt Hannah was on her mission. There was no way, you know, to get in touch with him or anything. No way that she could have come up anyway. I remember it was real hard on Uncle Sal. He got bad. So, but anyway, Dad, you know, it was really a hard thing, you know. He'd lost a wife before.
Gosh, that'd be tough. That would just be...
Dad told me that of all the things that he's had, you know, that happened. It was hard on him when Uncle Sal lost her, Stuart, died of cancer. And that's when Aunt Flyers and Uncle and her husband Don and Dee went down to Dublin for the funeral.
Oh, and that's when they got
And the
killed.
next day, that's when they got killed. And Dad told me that one time. He says that was the hardest thing he had to go through.
When?
Was when Don and Dee were killed.
Really?
But I think why it was so hard on him was that he felt so badly for Aunt Flowers. You know, it just broke him up to see her go through it. It was a hard thing. But you know, his faith never wavered. I mean, he was just right down the line. He always made the comment. He made a comment several times that where Joseph Smith had to excommunicate his own brother.
Which one?
William, I think.
Oh, William.
And he says, you know, what's right is right. And Dad played a lot of basketball when he was younger. And they had a team down there that I understand at one time they won the Nationals, the Mexican Nationals.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
There was Uncle Claude Bowman, his brother on it, Dad, and Uncle Harv, and Morgan Hurst. Hugh Hatch, that's Grandpa Hatch's brother. Jay Robinson, who was Dad's brother-in-law. He'd married one of Dad's half-sisters, Ethel Taylor. Uncle Oscar was the coach, Uncle Oscar Bluth. And they'd gone down to El Valle to play. And they just had a dirt court played out in the open. They didn't have any nets on the baskets or anything. And every time that you made a basket, then you went back to center and jumped again. You didn't take the ball out, you went back and you jumped. So that, delayed the game. And they had a pretty good combination. They had a guy that's pretty, was tall. I don't know if it was one of the Bowmans, but they'd get the jump.
They get it every time from.
Yeah, and pass it to this one brother, and then the other one to get over in the corner and shoot a hook. Make the basket, and back there, And they were ahead, and there was a captain from the army that was officiating. And the timekeeper wouldn't stop the game. And the crowd was really getting unruly because of these gringos beating them.
Uh-huh.
And so Dad said that there was a timeout called out, and the captain backed over where his wife was holding his coat, and inside of it was his pistol. And he pulled out that pistol and held the crowd and told them to clear out.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm.
He called the game, huh?
Yeah. He says he couldn't control them any longer, that they would probably lynch him or something. Now, an incident happened coming from El Valle that Dad told me about. Now, I don't know if this was at the same time or it was another time. Someone owned a chain-driven Cadillac. It was that old. They were very cheap cars.
Chain-driven?
Yeah.
Wow.
You had your transmission, then you had an axle coming out on each side and then on the end would be
Sprocket.
a sprocket. And then you'd run a chain then back to the wheels.
So it had no flecha, huh?
No, it didn't have any drive shaft. And they got out there, and I assume it's just somewhere out there between El Valle and Galeana.
Uh-huh.
The car broke down, and it was real cold. And they could see a light from the lamplight from Lou's Ranchito over there. And Dad says, man, they were hungry and they were cold, and they went over there. And the guy let them in the house, and I guess they just about filled it up, He apologized. He says that they'd just eaten the last of the beans. But all he had was tortillas and coffee. And some of the brethren on the team, they says, well, since this is all that we can have, it's all right to have tortillas and coffee. And they asked Lauren if he wanted some, and he says, nope. He says, tortillas and water would be fine for me. And Dad mentioned to me, and I will mention it now here on tape, who are the ones that had coffee. But some of those had problems later on in their life, inactivity and word of wisdom problems throughout their lifetime.
Huh.
But that's the way it was. I mean, he wouldn't compromise. I mean, I remember one time we were talking about, I don't know, he was talking about cow camps and stuff, how the guys he used to work for Bill Adams and a bunch of guys, and some guys that weren't members of the church, and how cold it was, getting up. And sometimes all there was to warm them up and eat was coffee, you know. And Dad says he'd break the ice in the bucket and have some ice water. He says, I wasn't going to drink any. He says, I wouldn't drink a cup of coffee for $1 million. I was young then, and I says, Dad, why not? I says, a cup of coffee won't kill you. And just think you'd be a millionaire. And he says, and what would my family think of me? He says, they just think I'm nothing but a damned old hypocrite. But that's the way it was. You know? He wouldn't. He told me he'd never smoked a cigarette in his life, never had a cup of coffee, never had a beer, never had a drink. His whole life.
Wow.
And that's unusual for people, you know.
Especially back then.
Yeah. And there was a lot of people there. And those old ranchers, you know, they kind of like these Utah Mormons, you know. They always have to have a cup of coffee to get them going, especially the guys at Pacheco and Garcia and Chucky in those places. But you know, I think that he had made up his mind as a very young man what he was going to do. And so when that temptation arose and confronted him, he didn't have to stop and think what should do. It was just an automatic reaction. That's what you're supposed to do, right?
Yeah.
You make up your mind before, because if you have to stop and think about it, you might get caught in a weak moment and succumb to the temptation.
Right?
Yeah. And he was smart, you know, being an old cow man. He, you know, not too much education. I don't know if he ever graduated from high school or not. But I know my grandma Hatch, and he were the same age, and she taught him in high school. So.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because he quit for a while. But he'd like to say that he was sitting there in school, in high school, chewing gum, and he was sitting back in his seat, the bench seat they had there, whatever they used, and had his feet in the alley, sitting back and chewing gum, and Enrique Gonzalez, Bobby Gonzalez's dad, was teaching Don Enrique, and he says, Lauren, take your gum out and put your feet in. Dad says, I can't, they're too big.
I can't.
Take his feet, take them out of the aisle, put them back in where they belong.
Oh, my.
But you know, after I was married, I used to go down there and ride with him, and he'd talk, and he'd say, well, how are you doing, and how's your family, how's Barbara and the kids, and what are you doing in the church, and what I didn't realize, and I realize now, I was having a personal priesthood interview from him, and that was before they even had what they call PPIs, but he had his way of getting around, and in a very kindly way, and you were being interviewed and didn't know it. I said to him one time, I says, aren't you glad all your kids are married and have been married in the temple? Now you don't have any worries. He says, I worry more than I ever did.
He said that.
I says, well, what about it? He says, you never know what can happen, or accidents. He says, I worry about the grandchildren. And I remember one time coming to church from the old schoolhouse. Church started at 3:30, and we got out at 5, and I remember walking there and kind of on the sidewalk, and then we just crossed the street anywhere, because it's just an old dirt road there. And he kept going down the sidewalk, and I says, well, where are you going? He says, well, I'm going to go see Hannah, see if she's okay. She wasn't out to church today, sacrament meetings. So he had that concern to check up and see everything was okay. I think if his posterity never gets to heaven, it won't be his fault, because he set a good example. He liked to read, and out there at the ranch, I spent a lot of time with him when I was after he separated, from the ranch, and
now, were you
in the summers.
How old were you when they separated?
I was about 16.
16.
Mm-hmm. maybe 17, but I'd spent time with him before, you know, when it was all one ranch. Uncle Sal spent a lot of time with him too, of course, when he was younger too. But Dad got me my first saddle when I was 8.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm. And so I spent all my summers out there, clear up until I went on my mission.
Hmm.
Well, until I got out of high school, put it that way, when I got out of high school. And when I got off my mission, I spent quite a bit of time with him. And he had that old lamp out there, you know, and he had an old kind of a leather rocking chair. And he'd sit in that. He'd read. And he liked to read conference reports. And he liked the Old Testament. He had his scriptures. Dad always read with his lips, you know. You could hear him. If I'd have paid attention now, I'd be really educated. I'd know all about the scriptures because I could hear every word he said. I was too busy reading westerns, and he liked to read westerns.
So he read the scriptures, huh?
Mm-hmm. I come home up to the ranch house one day from riding, and as I got closer and closer to the ranch house, I couldn't figure there's a lot of white stuff out there. Just a lot of white stuff. I couldn't figure out what it was until I got up close, and there were pages from a book. And in those days, they bound books a little different. Now they kind of sewed them, and then they glued them.
Yeah.
And I guess Dad had been given this book. They weren't paperback books, you know, they were hardbound books. And I saw all the pages, and when I got up there, and I says, "Dad, what happened to that book out there?" He says, "It's no damn good." So he'd torn all the pages out. It was real windy, and he just threw them to the wind. I mean, good thing they didn't have environmental protection people on him, because he sure messed up the area there for a while. You could see pages from that book for a year afterwards out there, caught in the mesquite bushes. And of course, those books today, I mean, those days weren't anything like, there was, as far as I know, there was nothing that would even come close to pornography. Probably had a few swear words or something in there that Dad didn't like. But he sure made short work of that book. It was no damn good.
So, do you know anything about his younger years?
Well, yeah, a little bit. You see, Grandpa Taylor had 2 wives. His first wife was called Aunt Mary. Actually, he had 3 wives. His first wife died. She only had 1 son, and that was Uncle Guy. That was Dad's older brother. And then he had a whole bunch of half-brothers and sisters. There was Uncle Lonzo, Uncle Delbert, Aunt Nora, Aunt Liddy, Durchie. You remember the Durchies up there? Comptons? I don't know if you ever knew them. But anyway, and so I know he didn't like doing chores for Aunt Mary. You see, those older boys were older, and they were buying and selling cattle, and they had a ranch, and so then Dad and Uncle Harv. See, Grandma Taylor only had 4 children: Aunt Maud, Dad, Uncle Harv, and Aunt Rinda. And so these boys had to go there and do the chores, and they had a cow. Did you get that? Have you heard that story?
No.
They had to milk that cow.
Whose cow was it? Mary's cow?
Yeah, Aunt Mary's cow.
Now, what was Grandpa's mother's name?
Her name was Hannah. Hannah Skousen. And she was mean. And I guess the boys weren't around, and so Grandpa Taylor, my grandfather, Ernest Leander, he had to go out and milk that cow, and she kicked him and made him mad, and so he picked up a club and hit her in the head and knocked her goofy, knocked her down. And he went in the house, you know, wait for the cow to compose herself and get on her feet and calm down so he could milk her. And Uncle Harv saw what happened. He was just going to climb over the fence, so he looked and saw it. And so when Grandpa went in the house, he ran over to the wood pile and got the axe and hit her in the head, you know, with the blunt edge like they did, and killed her. Took the axe back, went and hid, and half hour or so later, Grandpa Taylor came out and there was that old cow just dead in the doornail. He went up there and felt her forehead. And he says, Darren, he says, I didn't think I
Hit that cow.
hit that cow that hard. They sure got rid
Who
of
was
that.
who did that?
Uncle Harv.
Did
his brother.
did their father ever find out?
Oh, well, if he did, it was a long time afterwards, because I know they were going to tell him. But he used to have to.
So where did the wives live in different homes?
Yeah, they lived there in Colonial Juarez. They had a house with each other.
Those houses still standing?
Yeah, they've been remodeled, but they're still.
Where are they? Are they like a?
Well, one is the Nelson home. You know where the bank is and that in Colonial Juarez?
Uh-huh.
And then right there on the corner on that same side is the Nelson home.
Right behind the bank?
No, right south of the bank.
Oh, just south of the bank.
Like you were going to walk Van Ernie's, you go around the corner.
Yeah.
And then that next house over there, that's where Dad, that was Grandma Taylor's. Then Dad lived in it when he was
really?
When he got married. That's where Aunt Hannah was raised. When she was a little girl.
That's where the Bencomos live now.
Was it Bencomos?
Yeah.
George Red lived there for a while too.
Huh.
But and that's where Dad was living when he heard the gunshot when they were trying to get Grandpa Taylor.
Oh yeah.
You heard that story.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, when they used to have to go out and herd cows and herd horses. She says they had to herd those horses afoot, and I never could figure why they didn't have a horse to herd them with.
Do it on foot?
Yeah. Dad says he used to have to go to Limestone Ridge. You know where that is?
Oh, where the highway passes through?
Yeah, from Black Swell up there.
Uh-huh.
You know, in those days it used to rain a lot. And a lot of the grass would grow, and they'd mow it.
Uh-huh.
Dad says he'd get a pitchfork on his shoulder, and he always had, when we complained about working, he says, should be on there, shouldn't it?
Yeah. So
Anyway, he had to get a pitchfork on his shoulder and run barefooted clear out to Limestone Bridge and cock hay, put it on his little stacks and run back again. And he says that he and Uncle Harv, when they were young boys,
they have any shoes? They just run out there barefooted?
yeah, run out there barefooted. Feet were tough. That they were herding some cows. They're kind of on the Tinaja, over that way. And it says it started to rain, in the summer. So they didn't want to get their clothes wet, so they were just by the bank. So there was something like a little tiny cave. So they thought they would take their clothes off and put them in that little hole and keep them dry. And he says, they stayed dry. He says, but all at once it got to hailing. And he says, boy, they were sure dancing around. He says, that really hurt them. And but when he was a little boy, he said that he was playing there in the street there, and Colonial Juarez there, and where the Brother Johnson, what's his name?
Oh yeah.
Roy Johnson.
Roy Johnson.
That was the old Harper Hotel.
Mm-hmm.
And Grandpa Taylor, my grandfather, come riding by on his horse, and he says, Lauren, are you 8? He says, yeah, I'm 8. He says, well, Brother Harper's down at the swinging bridge baptizing all 8-year-olds. Go down there and get baptized. So Dad, he was barefooted, and I guess he just had a shirt and pants on. He ran down there, and he says, there was a few kids there all lined up, and he says when it was his turn, he just jumped in the water, and Brother Harper baptized him, and he ran home in his wet clothes.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm.
Quite a bit different than the way they do it now, huh?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. He says that a photographer come to town, and so the Hawkins, they were pretty poor people. And, Grant Hawkins.
Uh-huh.
So that had been his grandparents. And Orson Hawkins, which is Branson Thomas's dad, they came over to borrow Dad's suit so they could have their picture taken.
Uh-huh.
And Orson somehow tore tore the coat or something. When it come back, it was torn. So Dad says he waylaid him, waited for a horse and go around the corner, and Dad jumped all over him and got in a fight with him.
Oh, really?
Sister Hawkins is the one that sent word to Grandma Taylor she wanted to borrow her toothbrush because the dentist was coming to town.
Really?
But I think Dad, he just did things, you know, like all the kids, and then Grandpa Taylor had the Alamito ranch up there that the Wettons have now, and ran some cattle, and he had some orchards and some farmland, and Grandpa also had a saddle shop, a store, I guess a tannery.
Right.
He was pretty well off.
Mm.
And for those people, and so he, you know, Dad was there during the Revolution. He was one of the scouts, and then when Pershing came down chasing Pancho Villa, Dad got a contract to furnish beef to Pershing.
Oh, really? So during the Revolution, when they were a scout, I mean, what did they have to do? Do you know?
Well, like Dad one time, he was a young man. He was
like in his teens or something?
No, he was in his your age. He had to go down to Dublin and let the people know that all the women folk had left. Mm-hmm. But the priesthood was supposed to meet up in the stairs back up there behind Tony Moore's, so behind the J. And so they were leaving, and they were up by the Ojo up there above Old Town. Mm-hmm. That's when they got shot at. And you could just hear those things, zoom, these are like bees going over.
Passing over their head.
Says one guy had an old wagon, he was just going like crazy. The only thing in the back of the wagon was a sewing machine. He was just up flopping and jumping around in that wagon bed.
So this is before he was married to his first wife?
I think, I don't know if he was married at that time or not. Yeah, he had to been married because Aunt Hannah was born in 1913. Now my mother, Lily, in the Exodus, she went out on the train to El Paso. She was a young girl. So Dad was quite a few years older than she was. But that's what he did. But anyway, he had a contract, and Pershing put his headquarters down in Valle, San Buenaventura. You know, they had airplanes down there too.
Oh, Pershing did?
Oh yeah.
Really?
Yeah. Looking for Pancho Villa. Dad says they couldn't fly about any higher in the Chocolate Pass, or they couldn't fly over that. They had to fly through the pass. You know where the Chocolate Pass is?
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
They had to fly through it.
Yeah, they couldn't go there. See, the elevation there's almost 5, and those hills are probably another 1,000.
Yeah.
And it's probably all gone now, but there for years, when you left Palomas and went south, you could see part of what they call the Persian Highway. You could see old culverts still were in there and the grade that made up for the wagons and the old trucks and stuff. Mostly wagons.
I think there was a part of that left by where there's a bridge now, passing like a river, where you come out. You come out of that hill where there's some tight turns in there. Out of where is that? Is that out of Hama? But I think there was a bridge right there that. Mm-hmm. My dad told me it was part of the old.
Now you can see there's still the old parts of it. Dad had a bull ring down there too.
Had a what?
A bull ring. Toros.
Where they'd
for
fight
bullfights. Mm-hmm.
Your grandpa did, or
my dad?
He did. Huh.
He had that with the beef contract.
Oh, he had the bull ring down for the soldiers to watch.
And then
So who would fight the bulls?
Yeah, bullfighters.
Oh, really?
He says at one time they were there, and he says the bull come out. And he wasn't really black. He had some spots on him, Mm-hmm. And Dad says there were some colored guys there, black guys, soldiers. And they says, "Get that old milk cow out of there. What's that old milk cow doing in there?" And that dang bull was so mean that he put the banderilleros out and all the gente from the matador. And he came up to Dad and he says, I don't know what I'm going to do. He says, dang, the bull's so mean, my men are afraid of it. I don't know what to do. Dad said, well, that's your problem. You're contracted to fight him. And he says, well, just why don't you find out that if I get gored, if the Army doctors will take care of it, surgeons. So Dad went to, I don't know who he saw, and talked to them, and he says, yeah, we'll take care of him. It won't cost him a cent. And so Dad said this bullfighter, he put his own banderillas in and everything.
Oh, really? He did the whole thing
He
himself?
did the whole thing, and he says, and when it come, he says, he really put that sword just right in a vital place. That old bull didn't last long. He just collapsed. He says more money got thrown in that bull ring than I ever made.
Really? I bet if you don't by himself, that's pretty...
Dad liked bullfights. I remember the up there at the what's that place called up above Dublin now, where the stadium is there? They call it the Ranchito. Oh, you know.
Oh, yeah. Where they had the... like...
Where the baseball stadium
Right,
is.
uh-huh.
At one time, they had a bull ring there.
Oh, really?
It was. It wasn't completely encircled. It was just about 3/4, and it was big. It was wooden,
Mm-hmm.
and they had some pretty good bullfights there.
Did you ever see any?
Yeah.
Really?
Mm-hmm. I remember I went up with Dad to look at some bulls, and that's when I saw that they carried them just on a flatbed truck.
The bulls?
In boxes. Did you ever see them in Spain?
Uh-uh.
They put each bull in an individual box.
Because they'll fight if they don't, huh?
Well, no, not so much that they'll fight each other. They'll fight you. You just they're bred, you know.
So these are the regular fighting bulls that they use, huh?
Mm-hmm.
How would they get those things in a box?
Well, just like you put them in a chute, you know.
Uh-huh.
Just get them in there. And that's how they were in there, and they just come on a flat bed. 6 of them in the back, you know, and then load them. Then they'd have them in the corral, and they had a big old corral, and it was muy macizo. It was just, you could climb up there, and you just get your old hand over there like that, and
Hit the side?
oh yeah,
Really?
come right after you. And Dad would tell me about it. He says, see, these bulls are bred that way. They're bred to charge you. They're mean, and that's what they're for. And some of them, they weren't as big as bulls as some of they had, you know, but they were good fighting ones. And I'd seen them where they'd come in there and put that sword, and you could see that much sticking out of the belly. You know?
Really?
Oh yeah, they'd still fight.
And it'd still be a kicking, huh?
You know,
Wow.
for a while. They'd fight for a little while. But yeah, he had that. He liked that. He said that John J. Pershing, or Black Jack Pershing, was a general, and he was in charge of the expedition down there, chasing a bunch of game. Of course, they never found him. His men had just meld into the countryside and go back to farming or whatever they were doing, you know. But Patton, you heard of Patton?
Mm-hmm.
General Patton. George Patton. He was just second lieutenant then. He was down there.
Oh, really?
Down there. Just talking about him. But,
That's interesting.
so we're getting back to his youth, you know, he says that he used to run away and his mother would just get a piece of string and tie it to a toe, tie it to his bed, and he didn't dare break it. He just stayed there.
He'd get in trouble if he broke the string. So, you know, I wish I would have talked to was that guy that Grandpa went out that got shot, and he brought him.
Pedro Science?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Wish I'd have talked to him. I mean, he died, 10 years ago or so.
Do you have that story recorded?
Yeah, I think it's somewhere.
I've heard that story a dozen times. In fact,
Wasn't one of the Wagners with Grandpa Taylor?
Edgar Wagner.
Edgar Wagner.
And Joe Ireland was there too. A guy by the name of Joe Ireland.
Edgar Wagner's Aunt Carolyn's father?
Mm-hmm. He had been pretty young then. Joe Ireland, he was the one that was driving the Star pickup.
Now, they were taking bread to the soldiers?
They had supplies and stuff that they were going to go to the pulpit and sell. The mandalo, you know.
Now, where's the pulpit? That's down by On the way to Agua Prieta?
Yeah, it's a little south of where we go through now, the way I understand it.
Huh.
It was pretty rough road. But one day, I don't know where we were going. We might have been going to Deming or something. That's where they had the highway. Just as we passed on Ascension de Bajada,
Mm-hmm.
that's where Pete Science had his ranch. And Dad said, let's just go there and see if Pete's there. We went there, and Pete was sure glad to see him. Oh, hello, Lauren. You know, he spoke good English.
Oh, he did?
Oh, yeah. Hey, Lauren. He was
So now-
raised there in the colony.
What was he doing in this war?
Well, he was with Dad in them.
Oh,
There was Pete Science and Dad and Joe Ireland and Edgar Wagner that gone up to sell stuff to these soldiers.
oh, so they shot him.
And so when they started to get, as they went up, they left the truck below, and I guess they climbed up to see if they could find where these guys were. And that's when these red flaggers or some group of bandits, there were a lot of them roving around, they opened fire on them. They all ran. And when they got back to the truck, Dad could see that Pete wasn't there, and he says, we got to go back and get him. And he says, well, we can't. They'll kill us. He says, well, we can't leave him because they could see him up there waiting. He was wounded. You know, there wasn't much coverage, I guess. Cover then. Dad says that when he got up there close, Pete said, come on, Lauren, come on, Lauren. So Dad got in, they put a tourniquet on him. He'd have bled to death.
What was he shot in the leg or the
Shot
arm?
right there in the leg, right there. He had a big old scar.
Really?
When we stopped by that day, he told me the story and showed it to me.
Mm-hmm.
And then when Dad died and he was laid out there, and I says, all these people come by, why, Pete was sitting on the couch, so we sat by him, Gerald and your dad and Uncle Sal and I, and he started telling us the story, and he pulled up his pant legs and showed us the wound, and he started crying. Tears were just coming down his eyes.
Oh, really?
He says, Lauren saved my life, he says. And then when they got going, that's when Joe Ireland was driving so fast. He says, Dad says, slow down, you're going to blow a casing. And he just kept going. He says, if you don't slow down, I'll take the wheel. Dad owned the truck. It's Dad's truck. He was going to take the wheel.
Oh, gosh.
But they got out of there. Later on, the way I understand it, one of these guys was talking to Uncle Harv. And they says, we could have shot your dad any time we wanted to, but their leader says, no, pues si ese hombre tiene suficiente huevos de ir a agarrar a ese hombre, déjalo.
Huh. Wow.
They says Dad wasn't afraid of anything.
So how old would he have been then? In his 30s or something? No, wait,
Well,
that was-
let's see, he was born in 87, so that'd be 13. Yeah, he'd been in his 30s.
Mhm. Hmm.
I asked Dad one time, I says, did you ever shoot anybody? No. I asked him, did you ever kill anybody? No, you ever shoot anybody? No, he says, we waited up one night for a guy, we were going to kill him and throw him down a well. But he never showed up. He says, we were just young guys, he said.
Now, didn't he, you know, when Ernest Leander, wait, was it Ernest Leander Taylor? Or is that Hatch?
Ernest Leander is Grandpa Taylor, and Ernest Isaac is Grandpa Hatch.
Right, okay. Didn't, Ernest Leander was taken hostage, wasn't he? Is that,
That's that time when he shot that boy in the arm.
now didn't they take Grandpa Taylor too?
Yeah, because see, Dad, when Grandpa got shot, why, he saddled up his horse and he was going to get some men to see if they could get Grandpa back, and they caught Dad and took him up.
Took him too, huh?
Yeah, took him up a wash up there.
So they had the both of them
They
together?
had them both, and he was going to kill them. They were going to kill them both, and so Grandpa Taylor says, well, don't kill my son. He didn't have anything. Like father, like son, you know. So my grandfather says, well, what are you going to gain if you kill me? So they had a powwow, and they finally asked the boy that Grandpa had shot what they should do. And he says, well, have him give me 1,000 silver pesos and have him leave the country. So it took a while to raise that money.
So they just kept him hostage there
They
until they
kept-
raised the money?
Mm-hmm. While it took to raise the money. See, a silver peso that was the same as a silver dollar. It was worth a lot of money.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Money was hard to come by. I mean, cash.
Wow.
So it took a while, you know.
Well, he was rounded up Just going to get collections from the town?
Well, probably down to Casa Grandes. Old Town was bigger than Nuevo Casa Grandes then.
Huh.
And so Dad says that Grandpa Taylor was kind of like Uncle Harv. Uncle Harv, he was kind of mandon. I mean, he'd take charge of things real fast. And he says, well, you guys don't have anything to eat here. There's no point of us starving. He says, I have a ranch right here, right up here, not very far. And he says, you have me as hostage. Let my boy go up there and have one of your people go with him, you know. And bring a beef down here. We'll butcher a beef. So Dad went up there, and a couple of those guys with him, brought down a big old fat heifer, killed him, butchered her right there. You know how these Mexicans like carne. Like Dad said, they eat like hound pups. And then after that, he says, well, look, he says, of course they knew, you know, they were going to get the money, and there wasn't any danger then, I guess, of being fired upon. He says, I have 2 families to maintain. I let my son take some meat down to my families. Send your guys with him. So Dad took some meat down to his grandpa's 2 wives.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he was running the things. And so they got the money. The guy's name was Gutierrez that was doing this.
Uh-huh. What was he, like a red flagger?
Yeah, he was a bandido of some sort. And so Grandpa Taylor went to Chihuahua. He left the country, and he was down there just long enough to buy a double-barrel shotgun and all the buckshot he could carry. And he came back. And he sent word to Gutierrez. He says, I'm back, and I'm ready for you. And sometime later, Gutierrez came back to Colonial Juarez, or was coming. And so word got that he was about to come to town, and Grandpa had a whole bunch of plum bushes. Do you remember the ones that you have there behind your house?
Oh, yeah.
But they used to be
wild, just real thick.
Real thick. Well, he had those up in Colonial Juarez, and he picked a nice little place there, and a bed, you know, with water and everything. He had his shotgun there and all those shells. He was waiting for him, but they never come by.
Oh, really? Why did they want to get him in the first place?
Well, they were looking for him, probably to hold him hostage, is probably what it was, to rob him. Because, see, he had the tanner and the sausage,
I see.
those things there. And that's when he was hiding behind that little organ, and when that kid finally, they were all leaving, and that kid jerked that back and looked behind her, and that's when Grandpa shot him. That was a shot my dad did.
Oh. Now, didn't they take him hostage one other time, or was that the only time they...
That's the only time I remember. Dad says he woke up when he had a cow that just in the mornings just didn't have much milk. So Dad got up kind of early, and sure enough, he saw a guy hopping over the fence in there. And the guy had stolen, I guess, a loaf of bread up at the Bentleys. And he was eating on the bread and milking in his mouth and eating the bread, and he was just going, and Dad got his rifle. And the guy didn't see him. He was just kind of on his haunches there, milking or eating that bread, and Dad kicked him over. He said, ahora sí, cabrón, te voy a matar. Por Dios, no me mates. Por Dios, no me mates. Dad says, okay. He says, I'm going to give you just about 2 minutes to get out of here. If not, I'm going to start shooting. So that guy just kicking down the road. Dad got ate his breakfast and saddled his horse. He says he had a horse with a good gait. Dad was farming in Dublin then and lived in Colonial Juarez. He says when he got to Old Town, there's that old guy sitting there in the plaza with his feet up.
Oh, really?
He beat Dad there.
He ran all the way.
Ran all the way.
So did he know him? Did he know the guy?
No, he was somebody that's coming through there.
Huh.
Grandpa Taylor was a comisario up there.
Up in Juarez?
Uncle Guy was kind of a comisario too, you know, that's like a sheriff.
Kind of like a deputy or something.
Yeah. And there was an old guy there, a Mexican guy that lived there, that says he was a prophet. He had a tin roof. Dad says a bunch of those boys one night, one thing got rocks and just pelted that roof, for all they could. They don't lack for rocks down there in Tony Morris. They could just hear that old man in there saying, "Por Dios no me maten, por Dios no me maten." And he reported it. And I guess Grandpa asked Dad if he was involved in who else. And Dad got locked up. He said, "Sure hated it." He said, "Well, the grave was just darker and he could rats in there and everything."
Where did they get locked up?
In one of Grandpa's graves. That's what he used for a jail.
Oh, really?
Then if they had to take him down to Old Town, then they had to take him down to Old Town.
So he locked them all up?
Yeah.
That's funny.
Dad, he says that when he was young, they had the church houses where that little old schoolhouse is, Tony Morris, you know which one I'm talking about.
Yeah.
It used to be big. I remember it had a bell up in it, big old towers and everything. Kind of scary old place. Dad says they had mutual there one night, and when he says amen, he ran down the stairs and held the door on him. He says, "You would hit those kids." He said, "You were just right up against it," so he was just bumping and bumping and bumping. Finally opened it, and he expected to see a bunch of kids come out. And it was old man Scott, old Oliver Scott. Scott, we called him Grandpa Scott, and I can still remember him. Those days, when I knew him, he was just bald as he could be, and he had a big old long white curly kind of beard. And Dad says that's the way he was when he was. Of course, he was younger, but he really went after Dad. He chased him down and ran up towards the bridge, the wagon bridge there. And he says, you young whippersnapper," he says, "when I catch you, I'm going to kick you into next week." And Dad says, "Well, the way we're going now, you'll never catch me." He says, "No, but I don't know who you are, and I'm going to talk to your dad." And Dad says, "That really scared me." But I can remember Grandpa Scott down in my day.
Oh, really?
I remember the day he died. I was playing with, he was Scotty's grandpa.
Scott Blue's grandpa?
Mm-hmm.
Huh.
And Scott Bluth had a brother that was 2 years older than me, Jerry, that was killed in an airplane crash down. In fact, I should have been on that plane with Jerry that day because he come by for me.
Oh, really?
And all at once I decided, I'd never been in an airplane. I really wanted to go, but I didn't go.
Whose airplane was it?
Joe Daniels. He was a guy that was drilling wells out there on the ranch.
So how many people were in the airplane?
Joe Daniels and Jerry and the one, and then this other guy, Mexican guy, was in one of these, what they call a Texas trainer, one of those two-seater trainers. He was by himself. They were drunk. They got to flying close to each other on a Saturday afternoon.
So both planes? Both
planes were down.
They were all killed.
One crashed right there where the old ballpark used to be in the lumber yard. I don't know whether it is now the station. And the other one went across the tracks and right on the highway where Tom Bell lived. The Bell's house there. That's right. So yeah, I just kind of, he was the only house there on the end of the block.
All three of them were killed, huh?
Yeah.
Wow.
Uncle Sal and Leland pulled Jerry and Joe Daniels. I saw him pull them out. I got up there. Because then Arletta told me that like 2 planes had crashed, and I got in Uncle Sal's truck and I ran up there. I was about 14.
Wow.
But anyway, Grandpa Scott had died that day, and he had a little house there behind where Bruce lived. And they had the Relief Society there, and they had his old covers pulled up, his old beard was down, and had a Bible in his hand. You know, Jerry and I were playing hide and go seek in the old man's house, you know. So, yeah. You know, he was vago, I'm sure.
Wow.
He used to rope those old wild Terraceño cattle in moonlight up there.
Oh, really? Just for fun? Or?
Yeah, oh yeah. I mean, it was dangerous even in the daytime when you could see what you're doing.
Why would they work at night?
I don't know, that's what they like to do. It was up above where the academy is, and you know, all of that was Don Luis Terrazas, you know who he was.
Oh, yeah.
And, Anchondo was his foreman, Miguel Anchondo's dad, you know. I think his name was Don Miguel, and if you ever capared one of his bulls, it was jail sentence. And there was this big old bull up there, and I guess he was getting stuff. And Dad and a bunch of kids roped him, and they said, let's escapar him.
Who roped him?
Dad and some other kids. They were just young kids, maybe 12, 13, 14. They got him out there, and they just got him. And instead of doing it right, they just got him right up there. Se murió. He died. He was later. Don Miguel Anchondo was looking over. He was the foreman of that San Diego ranch, and he was looking there with my grandpa. So no one knew who had done it. That was a major offense. See, Grandpa Taylor, great-grandpa, your great-grandpa, had Durham cattle. They were blooded cattle.
Uh-huh.
And Don Luis's are más corrientes que came. They'd jump the fence and get in there. They were like, Dad says, like deer, they fenced it in. So they'd get in there and those toros would get those Durham cows.
Oh.
Probably improved them. Dad says that those Durham, they had to walk a mile to feed that die.
Well, you were telling me one time. You told me one time about the time that someone told you that about some tires or something like that.
Well, when they said Dad had bought some stolen tires. Yeah. Do you have that down?
I remember one time I was talking to you about that.
It was a summer day, and I guess I was about 17, and I was outside, and this guy come by, and he had a badge on his gun. One of Loren was there, and I said, yeah, he's inside. I said, Dad, there's a policeman out here. What do they want me for? I said, I don't know, let's talk to him. So he came out. He asked if he's Loren, and he says, yeah. He says, well, they want you up at the Comandancia. Dad says, what for? And they says, well, it's about something that you bought some tires that were stolen off a guy. And I said, I don't buy stuff off people. When I buy it, I go to the agency, pago el contado. Well, he says, come up there so we can get it straightened. So we got it. Dad says, come with me, because Dad speaks Spanish, but when you get outside of cows and horses, regular things, why he wasn't all that good. So went up there, and this guy, we put him in the back of the pickup. He'd walk down there, the summons Dad to go up there. So they took us around, and we went through this big saguan, this big room, and then they put us back in the big corralón.
Uh-huh.
And then, and I knew what that was, but we weren't in a cell. You could see guys in cell. They had a well there, and with some kind of a little rock work, Dad was sitting there with his knife out, cleaning his fingernails, trimming them, and then he looked around and he says, "Help!" He says, "We're in jail." I says, "You're in jail. I didn't buy the stolen tires." He got mad at me. He got up there and he says, "I want out." And he says, "No, I can't let you out." Ooh, he was mad. That's on him. And I says, "Well, I can get out." "No, usted si puedes ir." He says, "You can go." So I got out, and then I went, because I was going over to see who I could see, the presidente municipal, whoever it was. And as I went out and then went around the corner, there come Uncle Sal. He just come from seeing the president. I guess he heard about it. He was going to find Dad. He says, "Where's Dad?" I said, "They got him locked up." He's mad. Oh, I said, "He's mad." Boy, he was mad, and I had her. So we went back to the president. And so then they got Dad out. Oh, man, he was, I'm a taxpayer, and I'm this, and they say, "Me tratan como ladrón, cabrones, sinvergüenzos," and he was just mad as heck. And so they brought that kid in that they'd had in jail. And he says, "Okay, which of these Mr. Taylors bought the tires from?" There's the three of us. "No, estos no los conozco." Someone just told their name was Taylor, I guess, or something. Mexico, you're always guilty until you can prove yourself innocent. Dad, he didn't like that. When they first bought that ranch that they had, and they went down there below Chihuahua and bought a whole bunch of cattle, 500, 600 head. I don't know, it was a lot of them. And there was no way to bring them by rail there or anything. There was no highways. They brought them just driving them, herding them. Took, a couple of weeks.
Oh, really?
To get them there.
You went down by Chihuahua?
Yeah.
Huh.
And of course there weren't as many ranches and fences, but when they got into General Guerrero's ranch, he had about that time 250, 300,000 acres, muy grande.
Jeez.
And then he had, when you took a partida of cattle through, especially that many, you always got permission. Hey, can I water my cattle? Because they always used to do that. The Prados, when they used to come through to drive to the railroad, they'd just graze the cattle across. But you could graze. You didn't have to get permission to graze them across, as long as you kept them moving. But if you were to water them at a certain place,
you had to get permission.
You had to get permission. And see what you probably know. You know where on the way to Chihuahua, you know where old Guerrero's ranch is. The highway still goes by, and you can see back there a church and all that stuff, and the big buildings, and then a little old, there's some ojos there. And so they just run and water out clear across there, and they just end up on an old barrial lake, they just evaporate. So Dad didn't get permission to water them. He said, well, shit, it's just an ojo running out into nowhere. And old Guerrero's son, he was poco carajo, and he got Dad, and they always had soldiers there on the ranch. And he got Dad and locked him up.
There at the ranch?
Yeah. My mother was still alive then. I can remember how she was concerned. Uncle Harlow never come over and tell her, don't worry, Lillian, we'll get him. And Dad knew Guerrero. Uncle Harlow did real well. Uncle Harlow was muy político. He knew all those old General Guerrero and all that. And so Dad got out. I think they just kept him locked up a day. I said, damn, Matt, he says, I felt like setting his grass afire. It was cold. It was very. Dad says he had an old truck, that was hauling the campo. Of course, they didn't have antifreeze. At night, they would drain the radiator on the blocks. That's what they did with the school bus.
Oh, really?
Everybody did.
Every night?
Oh, yeah. You just you'd see people the next morning start the car, and then out there with an old tea kettle, Uncle Chico Jovi and some of those guys putting hot water in their car after they got it going. But Dad says it was so cold, and then what you do, you'd put a burlap sack in front of it, to keep the air to keeping it. Right? The dang thing froze up just driving. It was that cold.
Really?
And here they were driving cattle, and there's nothing colder, Gerald, than driving cattle in the winter. I don't know if you've ever been on a horse.
That's really cold.
Because you don't move, you don't circulate, your toes get cold. Yeah. Oh, that's the worst. Get off the walk. And they had an old bull. They used to point him out to me years ago. That old bull, his name's Huarachi. He says he got tender-footed when they were bringing him. So they roped him. They got an old tire and they had it cut out with some straps that they just made a Huarachi and put it on his feet.
Oh, really?
And laced it up, and that's how that old bull got there.
Huh. That's interesting.
Kind of assortment. They were kind of half-herefords, but they had brindles and they had big old horn cows.
And you remember that bull?
Yeah, I remember. Dad pointed him out. A lot of these cows that they had. They borrowed money for that ranch. Dad fenced the whole thing.
Really? Now that ranch was what Uncle Ashton used to have. That was what Ron had. Wasn't it what the Bowmans had too?
No, that's on the lake. That was about 25,000 hectares. And I remember going out with Dad and staying with him when he was fencing. See, I was 6 years old.
Oh.
And when they'd get up there, like in the Chocolate Pass, I remember there, they'd haul the posts for the kid, then they'd use burros. Haul the posts back up on the hills and the wire and stuff. They had a lot of burros, pack saddles and stuff, all that stuff. And the crowbars, and boy, they were just every week, they were just taking a whole bunch of crowbars over there at Brother Hardy's and also over to have them sharpened.
Oh.
He had Brother Hardy had the Fragua blacksmith shop. Then Jose Lopez had one just across from where Maynard lives. He used to have a Fragua there too. And that's how you had to sharpen them. Well,
Stop by. Sounds good.
I don't think it'll pick up.
Yeah, I don't think it does.
But anyway, there was this Mexican guy who was riding with us, and when he got out there, he says, "I don't understand English. I don't know what you've done, but you've done something bad." Dad called me a heathen, and let me send you to school for it. I was glad to get that. I think you better shut that out. I mentioned earlier that with Dad, you know, he believed what was right, and he respected the priesthood. He was unhappy with, I won't mention a person's name, but he thought that he had been done wrong. And over the years, he was upset about it. And one day, Uncle Sal saw him, and he says that Grandpa Taylor, and he was going to have it out with this individual. It's something that had passed, you know, some time ago, and it kind of festered in Dad's mind, I guess. And so Uncle Sal says, "Well, before you go and confront this individual, let's go talk to the stake president, who was D.S. Brown up in Cloyne Juarez."
Was Uncle Sal the bishop at the time?
No, I don't think so. But anyway, so he got in the truck with Uncle Sal and then went up and talked to D.S. Brown. And President Brown told him that he thought Dad was in the right in what had happened, but he thought for his recommendation as his priesthood leader was to just let bygones be bygones and let it pass over. And this individual didn't know really that Dad was upset about it. And so when President Brown says that was what the decision that he would like, well, that was the advice that he would give, Dad accepted it, and that was the end of it.
All right. Was
you know, anyway, your dad was told to go down and get George Red to get the truck started. And your dad says he was really scared. He's afraid a snake or something was going to get him or something. He ran all the way down, and they came back there. And the batteries used to be under the feet of the passenger.
Oh, yeah.
They had a compartment, and George lifted it up, and the cable had fallen off. Dad, he didn't even look. He wasn't any mechanic. But anyway, he bought those that year, and from that day on, he never owed a dime. He was never in debt. And he'd go out there, and then they built a little ranch house over there, and on the one side was a kitchen and a bedroom. Well, it had a stove and a bedroom and stuff, and that was Dad. And on the other side, they had a kitchen and a bedroom. Then they added another bedroom, and that was for the man and his wife there. And then they had a saddle room in the back, and if they had extra men, they'd sleep out there. We had a young guy that was working there by the name of Leonardo. He was blind in one eye and missing a couple of fingers. He was playing with it, found a cartridge, a rifle bullet, you know. He was picking it, and it exploded on him. But he worked there, and he was a pretty good kid. And one morning we went out there, and there was this girl. And we asked, you know, we're out in the middle of nowhere, and we asked what happened. No, Leonardo had gone down to Tierras Nuevas, down by Malpais, and eloped with her. That's what they called robard. He robard her, you know. And her old hair was all scraggly. I guess it slept out there, you know, in the bales of hay or something. I don't know. Dad says she ought to take a curry comb to her hair. But anyway, when Dad was on the High Council, why Wilfred Fondress assigned Grandpa Hatch and Dad to be the speakers at the Spanish branch. Well, neither one of them could speak Spanish as far as the gospel was concerned. Dad could speak Spanish better than Grandpa Hatch could. So Dad would get up there and speak to him in English.
He would.
And Grandpa Hatch would talk to him in Spanish. And Dad says, I know damn good and well they understood me better than they did your grandpa. And then when Uncle Sel got off his mission, why then he'd have him come up to go with. He says, I want you to speak in my place. So they'd get up and introduce, Dad. And Dad would get up and introduce LaSalle, and then he'd sit down and Sel, and give a good talk. And after a while, after a few times when Dad was called on to talk, he'd just poke Sel, and Sel would get up and give the talk. So when the land was affected, people didn't know what was going to happen. In fact, when it was all over, the government took about 12 million acres in the state of Chihuahua. And I happened to go down there when all of this was happening, and that's all everybody talked about. And Grandma Taylor, she says, well, I guess I could clean houses if we lost our ranch. She was so preoccupied, and what are we going to do? And Dad didn't say much. And I was out to the ranch riding with him one day. And I says, Dad, you don't seem to be very worried about what's happening. He says, I'm not. I says, well, how come everybody else is? He says, son, I've paid an honest tithing on this ranch from the day I've had it. He says, I don't owe a penny tithing on this ranch. He says, now in good conscience I can go to the Lord and ask him to help me. And that's the way it was. And so he gave up his ranch, and then Uncle Harv deeded that land back to him, and this is what he was doing when he died. And he was real busy, and he doing this, and he was the busiest man in the colonies. I mean, he was going and coming. He developed a hernia. It was kind of painful, and he went to see Uncle Roy and see what was wrong with him. And Uncle Roy says, well, Lauren, you got a hernia. He says, you got to either have it taken care of or stay off the horses. And Dad was about 81 then. And he says, well, he was 81. And he says, well, I'm working on a horse now. He goes, Jarico. He says, he's going to be a real good cutting horse. He says, I'm not going to stay off of him. And Grandma Taylor tried to talk him of staying off, not having surgery. He says, oh, what's a hernia operation? A hernia, as he called it. What's a hernia operation? And eventually he died. He had a blood clot after the surgery a few weeks afterwards. But I can remember one time I was about 16. Had a real bad drought down there. I mean, it had rained. My wages that summer was, Dad says I could have the hides of the cows that we skinned that died if we wanted to skin them. So an old cow died close to the ranch house. I'd get old Tacho out there, and it's really hard to skin a skinny cow.
Oh yeah, that would be hard.
A lot more work. And I take it into Dublin, old Pilo, Porfirio Flores there, who handled the tanneries. He says, any cuts on this? No cuts. No ears or tails? I don't think so. He said, you got your ears and tails on them. I got to deduct those, He'd spread the hide out and make sure we didn't have any cuts on them. But Dad sold some calves to Roy Adams, and I remember Roy Adams come by and wrote a check and left. Dad had his indelible pencil out, and he was figuring, and he had written a check. And he says, son, I want you to check this and make sure this is 10%. And of what this check was.